The Bible gives us a story about a particular famine that may help us understand something about famine in general in our day, as well as something about prosperity. In 2 Kings, under the prophetic ministry of Elisha, we have Samaria under siege. And in the context of that siege, we have people so hungry, so starving, that we're told that the head of a donkey sells for 80 shekels of silver. In the midst of that hardship, the king goes to Elisha, and Elisha prophesies this way. He says, by this time tomorrow, you will be able to purchase enough flour, enough barley to meet all of your needs for only 1 shekel. This was a place that was going to move from horrible famine to prosperity overnight. Well, to understand what creates famine, we have to understand this. It's created by sin. Sin is the source of famine. But obviously we need to ask then, what causes the prosperity? Because if you look around, if you look in history, you see that famines are actually, historically speaking, rather common. But our experience in this country has been a lack of famine. Since our country was founded, there's been no genuine famines in this land. But we know there has been genuine sin. Well, what we want to do is see if we can discern any God-given mechanisms that have helped us move from the scarcity of famine to plenty. And we want to find out how to harness those and see how they have been harnessed so that we can continue to move into greater and greater plenty and further away from scarcity. So what are these key components that help move us from scarcity towards prosperity? Well, some of them we've already covered. We talked about law and liberty and how these set a context in which we can be busy about the work of dominion. We've talked about how we move from work to wealth and how when we cooperate with one another as we exchange goods and services, we increase our productivity, which increases our prosperity. We create more of the things that we need and want. But that raises this question. How do we know what we need and what we want? How do we know what to produce and how much to produce it? Who tells us when to produce it and where to sell it? These are all questions of economic value. And God has even given us a tool here to help us answer those difficult questions. What then is value? Well, the first thing we need to understand about value is that it's subjective. Now that may give some of us the heebie-jeebies. It may sound something like philosophical relativism, a notion that there's no objective right and wrong, there's no objective true and false, and we ought to heartily reject that foolishness. But that doesn't change the fact that the God who gives us objective right and wrong, objective true and false, has also made us differently and put us in different circumstances so that we're going to value things differently. Some of us might need a wool scarf because it's cold outside. Others of us might need a sun hat because it's too hot outside. We all have different needs. We all have different desires. And what we have in a free economy is the capacity for some people to produce what others want in this way, and others to produce what others want in that way. We have, through the division of labor, through different vocations and callings, the different desires, the subjective desires of consumers being met by different producers. Each one of us ultimately values things differently. And that's not only true, but each of us ourselves value things differently. That is, each of us has inside ourselves an internal scale by which we measure how much we value this thing versus that thing, because each of us has ultimately an infinite amount of wants, and given that, we do indeed live in a world of scarcity. And that makes us need to prioritize what we want. Our circumstances may change, as we learned in 2 Kings, where at one point this donkey head was exceedingly valuable because that's all there was. But when there was greater prosperity, greater plenty in the wheat and the barley, suddenly the donkey's head was worthless. That happens in all of our lives all of the time. When we're making decisions based on this hierarchy of values in our own heads. But this not only applies to what we purchase, it applies to how we spend our time, and ultimately even in terms of what we produce. That is the kind of work that we do. I'd rather do this work than that work. I'd rather work right now than play. I'd rather play this than play that. Every single one of our decisions is built out of our ultimate desires, and those desires have to be prioritized because of scarcity. When my desires and your desires come together with our neighbor's desires, and this one over here and that one over there, they create this conglomeration that we call in economics demand. Now, let's not get confused here. This demand is an abstract principle, but it's an abstract principle grounded in actual human beings with actual desires. And when these human beings have the desire and the ability to make the purchase, they come together with what we call as supply. And the supply is the same principle. This one's able to meet supply, that one's able to meet supply, and together they create this supply. So when you have people with a desire and the ability to consume, and people with the desire and the ability to produce, and there's an intersection of the thing itself, that is what they desire and what they produce, then what we create is a market. Markets then are a fascinating interchange between different people's desires. I come to the market and want to trade this that I value less for what you have that I value more. You trade what you value less for what you value more. That's what's going on when we trade. Now, markets and trade can sound fairly abstract, but this is what's happening whenever we're buying something. When you go to the grocery store, you already know you're in a market there, or a farmer's market, but when you're buying and selling stocks, you're in a market. Even as difficult as it may be, when you're buying and selling a home, you're in a market. And all of these sort of specific markets are part and parcel of the broader market. And in all of these situations, as long as we're engaged in free trade, in voluntary exchange, again, we have people giving up, cooperating with one another, providing for the needs of one another in order to have their own needs met. God's designed the market to give us the opportunity to exercise our free choices, to minister to one another, and to pursue in a legitimate way our own self-interests. Isn't it glorious that when we do this, again, everybody benefits through these trades? Markets then are the natural result of the way God designed man. Because you understand that when we come to the market, to the free market, we come ready and equipped to choose. But choosing is not only something we ought to be able to do, choosing is part and parcel of what we are as human beings. We come to the market not only with our goods and services or with our money, but we come with will, we come with desire, we come with a rational mind, and then we engage in trade. And in that trade, what happens is I give you what I value less in exchange for what I value more. You give me what you value less in exchange for what you value more. In simply trading, there's no new production. We've increased the net value of our wealth in this community. Indeed, not only that, but as I'm pursuing my own self-interest, I've served my neighbor. I've been a blessing to him as he has been a blessing to me. Markets are how we cooperate in pursuit of our self-interest so that everybody benefits. Make sure we get that. When we trade, there is no such thing as an even trade. Now, I don't mean by that someone gains and someone loses. I mean instead that we both gain. Because again, I get what I value more, give up what I value less. You get what you value more, give up what you value less, which not only is a happy, positive thing, but in the end of the day, this is how we deal with scarcity. Because given our infinite wants and given the effect of sin, given the limitations of the natural order, this is how we determine how we're going to get the things that we value most and give up the things that we value least. So that we not only have greater wealth, but we have less poverty through free exchange. Now, friends, this is how things work, and we shouldn't be surprised given that this is how things have always worked. That is, you can find markets at work throughout human history. because this is God's design built around how He designed us for how we deal with scarcity. Given the potency of trade to help solve our problem of scarcity, we know that we want more trades. And pretty quickly we're going to find out that, as beneficial as it may be, barter provides some serious limitations on the trades that we can do. We have to find the person who has what we want and who wants what we have. And that's where money comes in. Money enables us to do trade in a far more complex way with a far wider outreach to more and more people, because money is a medium of exchange. And out of that flows these two important principles. First, it's in a unit of account. Now that sounds pretty complicated, but here's all we mean. It's a constant form of measurement of our values or desires that not only crosses from person to person, but crosses into different spheres of the marketplace. That is, if I'm willing to pay $5 for a pound of apples, and I'm willing to pay $50 for a new tire for my car, that tells me about how I value these things in comparison to one another. I value the tire more than I value the apple. But it also enables us to communicate because, again, it's a constant unit between our trades one with another. In addition, money also serves as a store of value. I may be willing to trade now, but not quite sure what I want in exchange right now. I may want to sell now and buy later. Well, the money holds that value so that I can trade at one time and trade at another time with the same units. If money is a manifestation of value, how do we end up seeing that value manifested? Well, we end up seeing it in the prices that we pay, that we're willing to pay for goods and services. What a price is an expression of the desire of the consumer to consume a particular good or service. But we know this about prices, given the fact that it reflects our demand and its relationship to the supply that's brought to us by the producers. There's a sort of give and take, a back and forth between the producer and the consumer at which we arrive at price. Well, that relationship is sort of summarized for us by economists in what we know as the law of supply and the law of demand. Well, we've done a lot of technical stuff already, so I'm not going to give you the chart or the graph that's going to show you that. I'm going to try to explain it to you in real life situation. Okay, so let's suppose that there's a bumper crop of apples all across the nation. And they flood into the grocery store, and now there you are shopping. Well, most of us have a pretty steady desire for apples. But the manufacturer needs to get us to buy more of these apples. How are they going to do it? How are they going to coax us to do that? They're going to lower the price. And in doing so, we're going to buy more apples because we're going to value them more at this price than we do at this price. And so these apples are going to move based on the change in circumstances that is the bumper crop. But what if the crop was a bad crop this year? Well, the opposite's going to happen. There's going to be fewer apples, a generally steady desire for apples, and then the way we decide who gets the apples is that now the price is going to go up so that those who value the apples more will get them. Those who are more indifferent don't get them. That happens all together on the supply side. Well, what about on the demand side? Suppose there's a new report that says apples make you lose weight. Suddenly the demand goes up, but the supply is going to be relatively steady because, apples come when they come. And so the price is going to go up again so that the people who really want the apples can get the apples. Or suppose that now the report is apples are bad for you, they're unhealthy, they make you gain weight. Now suddenly there's going to be less demand for apples, the same supply probably, and therefore again, the price is going to drop to coax you skinny people to buy more apples. Now, it even works in one more sort of context. Let's suppose that there's a greater demand because the apples are good for you and the price goes up. People are going to realize there's money to be made in apples. And there's going to be more planting of apples for the next season, which is going to stabilize the price. So what happens with prices, which is the fruit, no pun intended, of the money system, is that the prices explain to us where demand and supply meet. And where they meet is what we call the market price which is the fair price, what consumers are willing to pay and what producers are willing to sell for. We've seen that prices are determined ultimately by our desires. But we've also seen a little bit of a hint of something I want us to get to, and that is that my desires and your desires are different. We've seen also that my desires for apples and my desires for a new tire for my car are different as well. But what's stranger still is that my desire for one apple is going to be different from my desire for a second apple. That principle is called in economics, because we have to have long involved names, the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility, here's what it means in simple terms. If you eat that first apple and you have the opportunity to eat the second apple, is that second apple going to be as desirable to you as the first apple was? Isn't there a sense in which that apple satiated a portion of your desire so that now your desire for the second apple is less? And if you eat that second apple, how much more so is your desire going to get lower too? That desire getting lower, that's the diminishing part. The marginal part is that we're talking about the edges of our wants, that is that second apple or that third apple or that fourth apple. And the utility is the value we place in terms of the fulfilling of our desires. Now, why does that matter? Because the law of diminishing marginal utility is actually a potent force to help stabilize prices. Because even if the producer needs to move more units, there's only so many apples that you and I are going to want. And so again, that creates downward pressure on prices, and that's something we all like to have. Everybody's blessed when the prices go down, but the people with the least amount are blessed the most when prices go down. Friends, we need to remember that what we're seeing here isn't simply God's plan for the prosperous to get more prosperous. God's plan is to solve the problem of scarcity, which is a more profound problem with those who have less. And so when we follow his plans, when we obey what he's designed us to be, then we see that those at the bottom of the economic ladder are taken care of. Their needs are met, and God is honored. Prosperity then comes through a greater selection of goods and services available to more and more people. And that, friends, is the result of the very principles that we've been talking about. We move from scarcity to plenty as we meet more and more individual needs, more and more individual desires, when we enable people to produce and to consume freely. And driving that is free trade. Driving that is the mechanisms of the law of demand and the law of supply and even the law of diminishing marginal utility. These things construct the production, they construct the trade. They're all built around men acting freely and choosing. And out of all of this, not only comes prosperity sufficient for us who are practicing these things, but think about this in terms of history. We think that we're living in a time of economic hardship, and relatively speaking to the recent history, we may very well be. But in the West, as a general rule, we're moving farther and farther away from famine. We who enjoy the liberty that we're called to not only are moving away from our own famines, but we're able, out of our surplus, by God's grace, to help deliver and rescue those who are suffering from famines in other places that aren't following these principles. You can see the distinction in history that liberty brings prosperity and moves us away from scarcity because we're living in humble submission to the law of God and to the design of God.